Good morning, I'm Brandy Christian, the President and CEO of the Port of New Orleans. First of all, I would like to thank the council, the parish president for making time this morning to talk with the Port of New Orleans. Thank you for everyone else that's attended, some community partners that we've been working with on this project. We very much appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about our vision that we believe fits not only into the master plan of the Port of New Orleans, but a vision and a potential project that really has the opportunity to preserve the greatest things about St. Bernard, leverage your unique assets, but also create an economic growth base and really be a catalyst for the parish and for the region in terms of one of the biggest engines in Louisiana, which is the maritime industry. So we're excited to be able to talk with you this morning. As you are aware and you've heard, is that the Port of New Orleans has been in discussions with the Marrow Foundation about doing a feasibility study for a container terminal and logistics center, so a full port center on the SINCLAIR tract property here in St. Bernard Parish. What we wanted to do today is tell you everything that we know to date. I know there's lots of questions, lots of ideas, concerns, you name it, and that's why it's important for us to kind of kick this off and talk about the project a little bit, the concept that we're looking at for that property. Just as some background, based on market demands and our unique experience in the container business, we believe that St. Bernard is very poised to really be a key driver in the state's maritime industry and has the infrastructure, the assets, and the talent to be able to really propel the state's container strategy. But we see this project as more than just a container terminal. That's actually kind of a quarter of the project. It's really creating a logistics hub that attracts businesses that rely on port access, the goods coming in and out of a port. I'll talk a little bit later about how these types of terminals tend to be catalysts to bring other businesses, everything from logistics, manufacturing, labor jobs to executive jobs. Ports tend to be a bit of a hub and they attract those types of industries. And that's really what we are thinking about in this project. One of my priorities coming into the Port of New Orleans, I've been with them for 3 years now. And one of the first things that I set out as a priority was setting a long-term master plan for the port. And our master plan will be rolling that out in the next month. Obviously, this project is a priority and a key element of that plan, but our master plan really reaches beyond political boundaries. Really, logistics, cargo, they don't care about parish lines and governance, all those things. We look at it in the master plan as in the lower Mississippi, if you work together between the ports, the assets that we have in the lower Mississippi, working together, we are literally the largest port complex in the world. There's more tonnage moving through the lower Mississippi than any place in the world. And so the master plan really looks to do that, is to bring all of our efforts together and drive business to each of these areas, to each of these parishes. And we're very fortunate with our jurisdiction. We span 3 parishes. We have about 26 miles of jurisdiction, and what we're looking to do is to be able to spread that impact, that opportunity across our entire jurisdiction, but also make sure that one facility is not overtaxed, that it's actually spread out and is all integrated by a logistics network. And you may have heard recently that the Port of New Orleans is acquiring the New Orleans Public Belt. Having that railroad and the connection to the 6 Class 1s allow us to create an unprecedented logistics network that really cannot be competed with in the United States. We are the only port that has all 6 Class 1s connected to a port. No other port can rely on that. So when we talk about this project, we have to think about cargo coming in and out, not just by truck, but also by barge and by rail. We're able to spread those impacts against different modes, but also provide options to our customer and to our shippers. And it's really important to us, and we have Drew Heafy here today with the Port of St. Bernard. It's extremely important to us, that partnership. We thank him for the support that he's given us on this, and we really see this as an opportunity to bring additional infrastructure, not only to make this project a success, but to help with infrastructure for the Port of St. Bernard, and to synergize and draw more cargo and more business opportunities and companies into the lower Mississippi and in St. Bernard. Now, as we discussed the site with Miro, part of our master plan, we've looked at multiple sites, and SINCLAIR track definitely rose to be one of the top. We really believe that St. Bernard has the best assets in place to be able to do a project like this, and it's really more, not just about having access on the water side, that you have a place to put the ships, particularly if you think about what's happening in the world today with Amazon and Walmart. It's all about just-in-time delivery. And so you have to have the roads, you have to have the rail infrastructure, not just the marine terminal. And St. Bernard, when you look downriver, is in a much better position to do that. So made it very attractive, and I'll talk a little bit later about why the parcel itself was attractive. But you know, one of the challenges, and I have to tell you, you're very fortunate to have a foundation like the Miro Foundation. Through every discussion, the most important thing to them was a win-win for the community. They're very not only excited about economic development, but really care a lot about the quality of life issues. And we really, frankly, could not have lucked out to have a foundation like that to be able to partner and to advocate for the community and advocate for this project to be done in the right way. Now, as we approach looking at this site, we could have gone about this in two different ways. We could have done a bunch of engineering studies and put designs and had beautiful renderings to show you of layouts. We didn't do that. We chose a site, wanted to see if we could even get exclusive rights to look at it. It's going to be a lot of cost to doing engineering studies, et cetera. But most importantly, we wanted to be able to come to the parish leadership and have a discussion about, is this a vision that you share? And that we're just not going to roll out a design that everybody has to live with. And we really believe we have a rare opportunity with a greenfield development to do it right. It's literally a planner's dream to be able to start from scratch like this. So many ports, and you see it in Uptown, and I'll talk about this later with our current terminal. We had to shoehorn that terminal into existing wharves, existing roadways. If we had been able to start from scratch, it would not have been designed that way. And that is truly why this track is so interesting, to be able to do that. So we wanted to be able to come to the parish leadership, to the community, to the Miro Foundation, and start a planning process from the ground level that ensures we're all working from the same goals and objectives when we design this port center. So I'm going to share with you today everything that we know today. As we go through the due diligence process, we'll be engaging with the community, with the parish leadership as we go through the various studies. But we truly do believe that this is a project that will make St. Bernard Parish the key driver, probably the key driver in the state's maritime industry. It is a significant opportunity, we believe, for the parish to change the trajectory of your economic base and the port in the state's competitiveness in the business. So we truly believe that it's an exciting project. I hope after you hear about it, you'll see why we're so excited about it. The potential economic opportunities for it to be such a catalyst with a light industrial type of project. Typically, you see this kind of economic impact in much heavier type of industries. So we're excited about being able to work with you and setting a vision out of how this could work for St. Bernard Parish and the lower Mississippi. Oh, gotcha. Am I wrong? No? Sorry. Oh, I had to click it on, then I moved the arrow. Thank you. This is a map of the Port of New Orleans jurisdiction. As I mentioned, we have about 25 miles of waterfront and about 60 tenants currently across 3 parishes, Jefferson, New Orleans, and St. Bernard. The areas in green are current port-owned operated facilities. We essentially are in 4 lines of business. We are in the cargo business, and we do containers and break bulk activity. We're also in the cruise business, real estate, a number of industrial tenants, value-added tenants that are attracted to the port to do packaging, warehousing, processing of the goods that move through the port, and also a new 4th line of business, the railroad. So with those 4 lines of business, we will be a $100 million revenue per year entity. We do that all without any tax subsidy. It's all on revenues, and we manage the infrastructure and invest in that infrastructure with both our funds as well as occasionally state funds, and also investment by our private partners, the tenants. We are the state's only container port. We have the unique experience in the container business. We have the long established relationships with the ocean carriers, and those are the investors in a project like this. So we will bring that experience and those partners to the table to make something of this, the project of this size, work. Now, one of the things often asked is, what are the impacts, the jobs, taxes, you name it, from a project like this? They obviously occur over time as you begin to develop. The numbers that I wanted to share here, they're based on the Port of New Orleans' current portfolio, our current business. We are completing a study with LSU to update our economic impact numbers. We want to specifically do a study for this project so that we have real and specific numbers for people to be able to understand those potential impacts. And as you'll see, this project is a little bit different. It's really a port center. It goes beyond a container terminal. But as I mentioned, in Louisiana, particularly in this region, the 2 drivers of economic development are really hospitality and maritime. It's about 1 in 5 jobs in the state are actually related to maritime. What's important to note, what we're most proud of, is when you look at the jobs created by the port industry, our tenants and our employees, it's a 37% higher average salary than the average job in New Orleans. And what that means is they're family-sustaining jobs where people can afford to buy goods, to buy homes, invest in their communities. So that's really important to us. And when I talk later a little bit about, I'll give an example of some of those jobs, you'll see it's jobs from labor to executive, shipping offices to longshoremen. So it's really an opportunity to provide a job base for all levels of experience and education, and obviously a huge educational and workforce development opportunity. We also, the economic impact that we spin off is not just from the direct cargo business, but it's also all of the construction and purchasing of goods and equipment that the port does, but also all of those tenants and suppliers. Last year, we spent about $815,000 on women-owned businesses and $5.6 million on local businesses through our various, just the port alone, in terms of our contracts, engineering, studying. Obviously, that's going to be very important for this project, as I'll talk about. There's going to be a number of feasibility studies, and we'll leave some information so that you can get the word out. It's important for companies that are interested in working with the Port of New Orleans. They can actually register their business with us. So as we go through studies, we'll be able to notify them for opportunities. Now, from a tax base, this is based on, and it's still draft, the LSU study. This is the port's current impact. It's a very conservative study. That was important to me. You often see studies with crazy numbers out there. We really wanted this to be conservative. It's done by LSU, and they're still working on those numbers. Federally, we generate about $343 million in federal taxes. At the state level, it's about $55 million. Most of that is personal income tax, general sales tax, and other types of taxes, like taxes on fuel, gambling with the cruises, those types of taxes. At the local level, we generate about $66 million, and that is spread across the 3 jurisdictions. Most of that comes in the form of sales tax, which will include equipments and supplies that all the tenants, that all the users, that the port is using, and also from property tax. And the property taxes typically for a port is the land itself. Our acquisition isn't always taxed, but the tenant improvements are. And if you think about a green field, it's pretty much all tenant improvements. So there's a huge opportunity there, but right now we're generating about $66 million just to the local parishes. So talking a little bit about our container business, as you can see, when the Port of New Orleans moved to the container business, traditionally we move things that were not in containers, but the world has continued and will continue to try to find ways to put anything they can into a container. And you can see over the past 10 years that we have grown 67% in our container business, much quicker and faster than we had even projected in studies, and about an average of 6% a year. And really what has propelled us in the last few years is a combination of factors. The big one, and this is a good example when we talk about the other part of this project, drawing on the backside parcel companies that produce cargo, it's all the investment in the petrochemical plants in Louisiana, in Baton Rouge. They're producing huge amounts of plastics and resins that get exported. And one of the reasons we're looking at this project, they're telling us just in the next year to 2 years, they will increase their production and shipping by 40 to 50%. So that has been a great success, and what we're looking to do, particularly with this project, is to be able to attract those businesses that bring the boxes to us, because we need to fill them up with resins to leave. So your distribution centers, your retailers, they are the type that would be attracted to a logistics network like this, particularly with 6 Class 1s. The other thing that has driven some of the demand is there has definitely been a shift to the Gulf, looking at opportunities with Gulf ports. Labor issues, regulatory issues on the West Coast. Also, Panama Canal makes it much quicker, efficient to go directly through the Gulf. And what that means, they're also continuing to build larger ships. Some of those major ships, they tend to go to the East Coast and the West Coast. But the Gulf, what that means for the Gulf is a new focus. And they have very expensive ships and assets that they're looking for a home. And the Gulf is really attractive to them. And that's really driving a lot of our growth. I'll talk a little bit about the current container terminal, Napoleon Container Terminal. It's operated by 2 separate terminal operators, but currently it can process about 840,000 TEUs, and when I say TEUs, it's a 20-foot equivalent. That's how they measure the number of containers that move through. Containers either come in 20-foot or 40-foot. And so we're moving about 840,000 TEUs, and we have a 45-foot draft, 6 container cranes, and an on-dock rail facility. And with additional investment, and part of our master plan is to invest significantly in Napoleon for the next phase. Upgraded cranes and equipment, additional yard. That's very important for 2 reasons. Is we need to have the infrastructure in place to keep the business and to grow the business over the next 5 or so years. But looking at Napoleon, one of the challenges that we've always had, it is very land constrained. And when you look at where the industry is going, these companies want to be able to bring their products in and have adjacent land to be able to do value-added services, process them. They want to get them in and out very quickly. So that's why it's important to us to be looking in the future and have the infrastructure ready as the ships get larger and those types of activities are becoming attractive. As I mentioned, our jurisdiction is linear, and it's about 25 miles long. And so what that allows us to do is really build more of a network and tie all that network together by the transportation, the rail, the barges. When you look at the growth of the plastics and resins, people traditionally think about marine terminals and truck traffic, so much of our business is actually moving by barge and by rail. And that's what we have to offer, being able to tie all of our facilities across the jurisdiction, and even businesses not owned by the Port of New Orleans. Good example, the plastics and resin, the chemical companies, they're not located within the port. We have barge services to those, there's rail service to those because they're creating the cargo. And that's what we envision is really building more of a grander, bigger complex where we can spread the activity, the benefit, and the impacts across multiple facilities and look at it as one giant port complex. And we really see St. Bernard as the key, the evolution to our container business. So when we talk about the SINCLAIR site, as I mentioned, the concept is really twofold. It is looking at a container yard because that's kind of the catalyst, it's the engine, but it's really also the additional acreage to be able to build a logistics center to attract businesses that are doing processing, distribution, maybe fabrication. It's very attractive to be close to a port to be able to get easy access in and out efficiency, especially with just in time. Now, what's interesting about the site is its rectangular shape. So I talked about, and I'll show you a picture later, of the Napoleon Container Terminal. It's long and linear, really no backup space. This was very attractive to be able to look at a site that would only be able to handle both terminal but also those value-added businesses. And looking at the bigger picture, when you look downriver, St. Bernard has much more invested in sophisticated infrastructure, multiple roadways, rail into the site that you don't have to build that. If you're starting with a greenfield project to build a container terminal, you have to think about not just the terminal, but you have to think about the roadways, access to freeways, all of those things. When you look downriver, St. Bernard is much, much further ahead than any other area in sites that we looked at. And we also believe that a project of this scale and magnitude and partnerships that we will bring, the investment will come from the private sector, terminal operators and ocean carriers. What we have asked for the state to get this project done is that they invest in the infrastructure, additional roadways, access to the freeway, improve the rail crossings that, you've already got some challenges here. Can we make improvements to that? Really, that is where the state needs to participate. And a project of this scale can draw that kind of attention and prioritization and also provide solutions not only to this project but also to the Port of St. Bernard and other businesses that have been looking for that infrastructure investment. The other thing is being able to start with a green field. You look at a property like this, as I mentioned earlier, we would have never designed Napoleon from scratch the way that it was built. We would have had discrete roadways, segmented the traffic from the regular vehicle traffic, from the truck traffic. A big advancement was when we created the Clarence Henry Truckway because it separated out that traffic. But again, this kind of being a rectangular shape really allows us, and having already 2 arteries of roads coming into it and potentially building a third would be a huge opportunity. And this is actually, this next one is actually the drawing. SINCLAIR is a registered parcel for sale on the LED site for maritime and potentially container terminal use. This is actually the rendering that they used. And as I mentioned, we really see the opportunity for the front side to be a container terminal, and that can really be buffered very well. And I'll talk about some examples of how you kind of buffer a container terminal so that it transitions and blends softly into a community. Because if you think about it, almost every port operates in an urban setting because ports can only operate on the water, but what's happened over the generations is that the community, people, want to move to the water. So almost every port is surrounded by houses and businesses and local streets. And so there's been so much advancement in what you can do to make that a good relationship. And so I'll talk about some of those. But we see this backside really being a logistics center. So we really see this as a port center, not just a terminal. That's just really one small element, but the driver of it. And this is just an example. It's a little bit of an academic slide, but you know, when you talk about an economic engine, companies and industries tend to attract around ports because that's the only way they can get their goods and supplies and their products in and out. And there's so much cost to having to truck it and rail it to get to a port that they tend to attract to ports, and it really becomes a hub. Some of the examples of the most direct, obviously, is the employment through river pilots, tug operators, towing, cargo handling, ILA. I'll talk in a minute about, in the next slide, about some of those salaries. But then what happens is you have the shippers, the people creating the cargo, to have that adjacency. And frankly, with this parcel and having this extra land, we will have something that most golf courts don't. They're very limited in their footprint. They cannot attract a distribution center or somebody that we can say you have immediate access to this facility. But you start to see those types of businesses, logistics related, warehousing, transloading, packaging, processing, distribution, fabrication. So that's a whole nother set, not just to that parcel, but really along the road and rail network. So other areas of the parish definitely we could see opportunities for those types of businesses. But also you start to see industries that supply equipment and goods to those companies and to those tenants, to all of the residents that are living in the area because their jobs are here. You start to see the Home Depots and those types attract because they have a residential base of purchasers, but they've also got businesses that are relying on that type of equipment and goods. And so really, the vision is to create a catalyst for St. Bernard, and obviously the surrounding area would benefit as well along the rail and road networks and the river. Just an example of the types of jobs that you see, as I mentioned, they are 37% higher paying. These are kind of starting salaries, like a longshoreman is starting at $54,000. A lot of the crane operators are pushing $125,000 a year. What's important about these jobs is you see everything from labor, you see trucking, you see rail, but you also see the shipping companies. If they've got tremendous amounts of volumes, your MSCs and Hapag Lloyds, they're going to want local offices. You start to see logistics companies. And so what's really nice is that it's a kind of a job for everyone. There's all levels from trade to executive, but that becomes very important. You have tremendous assets here locally with community college and doing workforce development to prepare the workforce for these types of opportunities. But these are family-sustaining jobs. I wanted to give you an example of a logistics cluster. This is actually Savannah, the Port of Savannah. Is you'll see a number of logistics within just 6 miles. You'll see the types of businesses, and I don't know how well you can see it up here. My eyesight's a little bad from distance, so I can barely read it myself. But what you can see is you see an industrial park. You see the Savannah Intermodal Trade Park, and what that is, and one of the concepts we will study, is being able to actually have remote intermodal centers where the trucks go to drop and pick up containers so that they're not having to come as much down here, that they can actually do it remotely and things get barged or railed in. But you see development like that. You see other businesses like Target, Lowe's, Home Depot, IKEA, an aerospace manufacturer, and a technical college is all centered around this activity at the port. And as I mentioned earlier, every port has neighbors. As I mentioned, communities, they've moved to the water. You know, when you look at New Orleans, and I'm going to show you a slide of Napoleon Uptown next, but in the old days, before automation and cell phones, everybody built their houses in New Orleans around the cargo terminals because they would hear the ships blow their horn and that they knew that's time to report to work. So that's why the community was built the way that it was. And you see in that footprint, we're surrounded by neighborhoods. This is an interesting example. Charleston, one of our biggest competitors, especially on the plastics and resin side. This is a new terminal. Most significant ports, container ports, have at least 2 container terminals. This is the Wando terminal. and it's still ongoing under development. But what you'll notice here, you can see all this greenery around the side, and then this huge residential development. That is probably, this whole area is probably the highest real estate in Charleston. And this development, these $1 million+ homes with private docks, were actually built after the terminal was constructed. And they share a roadway going into the terminal or turn off into the residential area. It's been a huge catalyst, and as you can see, some great buffers, a lot of greenery, and I have to tell you, to me, that's one of the things attractive by nature of the SINCLAIR property. You've got a lot of that natural buffer as it stands, and it reminds me quite a bit of this type of development. But this is very common, particularly in Europe, but you look at ports like Miami, Seattle, most of them are co-located with residential and other types of businesses. Now, a little closer to home, this is the existing terminal in New Orleans, and it's adjacent to all the uptown neighborhoods. The highest real estate prices are in this area, adjacent to the container terminal. And a big opportunity for us is when we created that dedicated truck route, but again, we would have had a lot different designed infrastructure, roadways in and out if we'd had the chance to do it from scratch. But it's, for us, it's worked very well. In terms of community, really, some of the biggest challenges that we get is actually not the container business, it's the noise from break bulk activities. When you're loading coils and things like that, they hit the barges. That tends to be the biggest issue for us. And also the access from the freeway. And what's interesting is when RPC did a recent study with the challenges with Chapatulas, access from the freeway, the port was 9% of the traffic. The problem is you're intermixing with tourists and conventions and other shows like that, hotels, and commuters, and that really creates a challenge. So we were able to create the Clarence Henry Truckway to at least try to separate us off from that traffic. It would have been nice to be able to go further than that, but we have to use those old existing streets that were not built for, built for little buggies, not for trucks and this, volume. But this has, been very successful. Obviously, you look at the home prices in Uptown, they continue to sell and remodel in this area, and it's always existed next to this terminal. Now, when I talked about a lot of the questions I know that you're getting, that we're getting is, how is it going to be laid out? Do you have a picture? Do you have a rendering? I heard you're going to cut off this road and that road. We don't know. We have not done that. We honestly did not want to do planning in isolation. We have to understand what the objectives are, the ideas are of how this not only can work for the project, because what's important to us, you have to remember, absolutely, it has to work for the community, it has to work for the residents, but it also has to be successful. This is $1 billion+ investment. Our partners are going to want to make sure that the roadways and the community relations, that it works for everyone, because it's got to be successful. And so there's nothing to be gained by making the impact negative to the community. Really, it's all to create something that works for everybody, because it's not only the surrounding community, it's also a lot of those people will be working at this terminal, at the related businesses. It's really important that it's done from a community standpoint. So, one of the challenges we had was, I can't show you a picture. I have no idea what all the buffers could, will be, what roads, all those things. We have to do tremendous amounts of feasibility studies. This is just a partial list of the studies that we'll need to do. First and foremost, the priority is commissioning an economic impact study so that we can answer questions specifically about taxes, about job creation, get realistic numbers, but also engineering. The first thing we have to do is make sure that the parcel, the riverside works, slope stability, construction of a wharf, navigation of the site, environmental due diligence. All of those things have to be done, and that's when you'll start to see some of the ideas, and we'll be able to talk with the parish and with the community about what are some of the options so they can actually be studied. Understanding parish planning regulations, utility and drainage issues, capacity analysis, obviously cost analysis, geotechnical permits. All of that has to happen, and that's when a lot of those questions will be answered. But really, again, we see this as an opportunity, a greenfield project for us to create it the way that we think ideally, and the experts are telling us that it could be successful for everyone. And some of the other types of studies we'll be doing, obviously, are cargo projections, related traffic and transportation. What are potential impacts? What are potential solutions that can be constructed? And again, this is the number one thing that we've asked for from the governor is we'll bring the private money for the terminal and the facility. We need to prioritize infrastructure. And there's been a number of projects that have been on the slate for St. Bernard for some time. Is really, we believe a project of this size has the opportunity to drive that prioritization. We have to do community impact plan and mitigation. All of that we'll be doing throughout this process, and that was something that was extremely important to the Miro Foundation. So this just gives you an example of all the various things you have to do to be able to answer some of those questions openly and truthfully. We've got to do these studies. And as I said, it was important to us to come to you at the ground level to make sure that everyone has input in how we approach those. And these are just an example of what's been done in the industry in terms of mitigations. As I mentioned, obviously, ports operate in urban areas. They've had to come up with these types of solutions. I have to tell you, in the port industry, particularly on the cargo side, containers are the most automated, cleanest type of activity that you would see. There's been great investment in evolution, in automation, and environmental programs to make sure that these projects are done well. So a couple of examples, you often see light alignment, LED low mass lighting, so that there's no impacts to lighting on surrounding areas, surrounding neighborhoods. Noise abatement. Amazingly, they actually have technology where a laser slows down the crane a foot before it drops so it doesn't slam down. It automates it and then sets it down lightly. And I've not figured out how to do that with a steel coil into a barge yet, but it's pretty fascinating what they've done. Obviously, low emission equipment, cranes, all of those types of activities. And near terminal, landscaped buffers, as you saw in the Charleston example. Physical barriers like sound walls. What's important to us, one of the first things I noticed when I started Port of New Orleans was this great long flood wall. I guess it created a natural barrier and a buffer, but it also presented a challenge that we couldn't produce or build something that was attractive and blend it and transitioned into the community. But often you do see sound walls and those types of buffers, and also rail and road. Again, dedicated truck routes have worked very well for ports to be able to separate the traffic. Also doing remote cargo transfer facilities, as I mentioned, being able to have basically depots, we would envision maybe over in the East New Orleans. You have a number of rail yards like CSX where you could actually have trucks picking up and delivering from those sites. So it really spreads out the traffic impacts directly to the terminal. And obviously, as we do these studies and bring in experts from the container industry, they'll be sharing with us the numerous different mitigations and ideas and solutions they've come up with that could be used on this project. Probably hard for you to read from a distance. One of the questions we've been asked is how many jobs could this create? As I mentioned, we want to do a specific study for this project. There's nothing worse than throwing out crazy numbers and everybody wonders, how did you get there and did you ever live up to it? That's important to us to have real numbers as best we can. It's all projection. The one I can tell you that's used in the industry as a standard is that for 90 TEUs, you tend to create one job, one direct, indirect job. So if you look at moving our current, 90 TEUs, you could have with 500,000, it's about a little bit less than what we're doing at Napoleon right now. 500,000 TEUs. That's about 6,000 direct jobs, direct and indirect jobs. If you look at this potential project, if you were to move about 1 million TEUs, you're looking at about 12,000 direct and indirect jobs. And that's an industry standard. Again, we have not done the study on this site, but it's a standard that's used in the industry to give us a little bit of guidance, because I know that is a common question. Again, we're prioritizing getting that economic impact study done. As I mentioned, projects like this tend to be catalysts to create an economic base, attract businesses, attract residents, new residents, because they're employed here, and now there's the services and the other companies, et cetera, that have moved to the area. All of that generates a new tax base, both for the state and for the parish. And as I mentioned, right now, we're doing about 66 million on the local level. Also, state competitiveness. You know, we are the only state container authority in Louisiana, and I can tell you, with the amount of plastics and resins that this state is producing, Charleston, Savannah, Houston, they all would love to take it. And so it's extremely important that we look down the road, we plan for the future, that we can stay competitive and outpace that growth. And that's why, to us, this project is so important, and really sets, if we were to do this project, sets St. Bernard as a key driver in that strategy. And again, opportunity cost. You know, with our current capacity, we have capacity at Napoleon. We will continue to make those investments, but really, by having a second container terminal, we see the opportunity to not only grow 6% a year, but to capture a new market that we won't be able to capture in the future. Ships are getting larger. People are wanting to have the landside opportunities. If we don't plan for this in our master plan, we'll probably forgo that opportunity. And lastly, a recognition that this has to be a positive for the parish, for the terminal, for the investors, and for the community, for the residents. And again, what was so attractive to us looking at SINCLAIR was that greenfield opportunity to really try to do it right, to make sure that it's designed in a way that can be low impact and really change the trajectory of the economic base of St. Bernard, but also of the Port of New Orleans. So we're excited about the project. That's everything that we know today. We're just starting this process. We're now looking to bring in the engineering assistance to start these feasibility studies, and we are getting that underway as fast as we can, and as we develop that, we'll share the information. And so with that, I would be happy to take any questions, and I understand from the clerk that we need you to come up and speak in the mic because it's being recorded. Yes.
Brenda, you mind if I say a few words?
Please.
Before I have to leave?
Yep. Come around. I guess we're recording.
I have an RPC meeting today, Charlie. I don't know if you're going, and Howard, I don't know if you're going either, but we have to leave here pretty soon. But Brandy, thank you so much for coming and doing a presentation today. We have a lot of the stakeholders here today that are going to be interested in this decision-making process over the next year. You know, I just want to give a perspective, and we all know what has happened over the last few years, going back, 5 years or so. You know, the previous council, and I was part of that council, and we have 4 of us here today, put some pressure on the Economic Development Commission to hire a new director. We went through a rigorous selection process, and Andrew, the cream of the crop, raised to the top. So, and I can remember, and I'm not sure who said it or whatever, right? But we said, listen, we want skins on the wall. We're tired of just moseying on through, St. Bernard, where we're at. We have this economic engine, the river. This money's passing us all day long, every day. And we asked him to put some skins on the wall. And when we said that, we asked them to swing for the fences. I remember specifically, somebody said it, I don't know who. Swing for the fences. And you know, sometimes you get what you wish for. And you might want to take a step back and say, okay, we caught a hold of one. Let's see how this is going to affect our community. So right now, we're in a situation where, and I think all of us are doing the exact right thing. Is, you know, some of us want to say, man, do it, go for it, opportunity. We can have a Target now. We can get a Chick-fil-A now. You know, we're gonna, you know, our community, we made it. Like, let's do it, start tomorrow, right? And a lot of us are, hey, hold on a second. We're a bedroom community here in St. Bernard Parish. That's all we've been. We're good. We don't need this. So, but I think all of us have taken an even keel. We are going to take a step back, and we're going to be open-minded, and we're going to allow Brandy and her team, the Port of New Orleans, to participate in this feasibility study over the next year. And I'm assuming it's a year-long process or so. So how exciting is it that we have this opportunity? So that's number one. We're doing something right. People are moving into St. Bernard. You know, we're going to have to find out why people are moving in. What type of quality of life are they looking for? You know, what type of expansion do we have to the eastern part of our parish? We just put a new water line in down on 46. That's for expansion. That's for residential development. So, you know, it's so exciting that we got a hold of one. We got a great partner. Look, Brandy and them came and visited my office when she got hired. And one of the first things I said was, you know, it's frustrating that the Port of New Orleans has their thumb on St. Bernard. Port of St. Bernard, that we can't expand. Why can't we expand? Why can't we do a lot of the things that New Orleans is doing right here in St. Bernard Parish? I know we had Mr. Billy on the board, the commission. He does a great job. He looks out for St. Bernard Parish. I remember telling you that. And I remember her asking, you know, well, what type of properties you had in St. Bernard Parish and where would it be? So I remember we had that discussion. And that's part of what Andrew and the Miro Foundation in collaboration, put this particular property on the federal register or something, right? Economic Development Register. And here we are today. So, you know, what do we want to be 50 years from now? What opportunities do we want our grandchildren? Well, I say grandchildren, children, grandchildren. Man, that's a big decision for us. And it's going to have implications for generations. And it's so exciting, and I'm glad everyone is, we have the school board here today. It's important to them. You know, so as I have to leave, and Brandy, I appreciate the collaboration you guys have had with the Miro Foundation. And I do know that the Miro Foundation's commitment, and we have talked, is to the quality of life of the citizens of St. Bernard Parish. And if at any point in time, the general consensus would be that, hey, pull the plug, you know, they're going to honor that. So in honoring that, I think we need to keep an open mind and go through this process. What are we doing in St. Bernard Parish government? William McCartney, sitting right here, I asked him to put together 2 business trips for anyone who wants to attend. We don't have any dates yet. We want to visit Charlottesville and Charleston and Savannah. And we want to look at it from the governing authorities or the municipality's point of view, not the port's point of view, but the municipality's point of view. How it impacted their communities, you know, positively, negatively. And we'll probably meet with the port and kind of see what the relationship is and the type of things that they're doing for that community. So everyone's going to be invited, you know, he's going to have the costs, he's going to have accommodations and all that good stuff. So I think that's something that we need to do. Well, I think we all need to discuss whether or not we want to do our own feasibility study. Some, you know, type of economic impact, and to maybe match that with the Port of New Orleans. I don't know what other communities do. That's something we're trying to learn. But for me, it's something that we might want to have some type of independent look at what this means for our community. So, thank you so much. I just had to say something. This is just something that's so exciting for us. We work so hard every day. We're not doing our job if we're not seeking these type of opportunities. We may have to turn them down, and maybe we'll accept them. Our community is going to change if we accept this. And I can't imagine that with everyone that we have in this room, that we can do a project like this in St. Bernard Parish and have 0 victims. Neighborhoods, citizens, people who live right next to this development. So, we can make this happen. Our community development director is here, Jason Stoper. I can tell you he's one of the best we have in the region, and he can work within this apparatus to make it happen. So thank you guys for coming, and Brandy, thank you so much. I apologize for doing this. Thank you.
I'd be happy to take any more questions.
So I realize that we're early on in this discussion, and I know that everybody has a lot of questions, and maybe they're not able to answer them yet. One thing that I'm seeing, and I know a lot of the council is seeing, is citizens that are already hearing of this and have opinions formed very quickly. St. Bernard isn't the best community to deal with change, as we all know. I just want to know if there's any thought process or ideas on announcing this to the public sometime soon, or at least letting the public know what the plan is and how we're going to do that, so that we can be in front of it and present it in a positive light, as opposed to them hearing about it through word of mouth and maybe it not being as exciting of a project as it could be if we're trying to follow behind that.
Absolutely, and that's something we're working on right now, and been working closely with Miro and with Andrew at the Economic Development Foundation. What was interesting was our goal was, and partly if you think about the history in the region of projects, there's been some pretty wild, new container terminal floating in the middle of the Gulf, all these different, a little bit of project fatigue. So what was really important to us and to me was to not overset expectations with some grand, crazy idea, that I really wanted to be sure that there was even a site that could work. And it is, the parish president was saying, it's pretty darn scary on my side too, to do a project like this. I mean, we have probably over 500 million invested in Napoleon. It's a big step to do this. We really wanted to be sure, especially when we signal to the market that in order to be prepared for growth, we need a second container terminal. We're telling them, hey, we might have an issue. So we wanted to be sure that we had something real. And a lot of that was looking at sites. And we didn't plan for it to, start getting out to the community so fast. But frankly, I felt strongly, Miro felt strongly, that we need to sit down with the parish leadership and let them know what we're thinking. And so that, trickles very quickly. So absolutely, the other big thing we were trying to work on is I also wanted to have the public-private partnership negotiated and finalized so that we could signal this is a real project. We have the partners, and I'll tell you, similar to what the parish president said, very similar experience to where going through our master plan, we were meeting with all of the top ocean carriers. MSC, Hapag Lloyd, asking them what they needed from us the next 10, 20 years. And what stunned me was they want more investment, they want to grow. And we said, potentially part of our master plan is looking at a second terminal. They said, I'm in. And I was shocked. The bullishness of looking at Louisiana, I did not expect. I did not think we would move this fast. It's great. It's a great problem to have. And, kind of like I said, sometimes the stars just align and you got to take that opportunity. So I will tell you it's very scary from my side as well. And that's why it's important that we get that information and get it out to the community. So we're talking through that now, the best way to do that, because it's a feasibility. We're doing a lot of feasibility. We'll probably communicate that we're doing this exploratory process in the next week or two. The other piece of it is that the port's been working on its master plan, and this was such a big piece of it. It was kind of a chicken or an egg, so we'll be rolling that out over the next couple of weeks, and I'm thinking, that's a broad, great context for people to understand a number of projects that potentially could happen within the Port of New Orleans, and this being really a keystone one of that. So we will be doing that next couple of weeks and working with local officials here to think about the best way, the community, the best of how to get that information out. But absolutely. And as I said, we're actually going through the process now to start these studies, and so that's going to generate and help answer some questions as we go. Any other questions? Deborah.
I have a question. You had a figure there. There was a statistic that was shown that currently the Port of New Orleans generates 9.2 million in taxes to St. Bernard Parish. As Chair of Economic Development, if you could send some documentation or quote your source of information, I think it would help us understand, because that's a large number. And if we can understand every economic study, it's whether the first tier direct or it's the cab driver that did this or that. So if you could get that statistic source of information to Andrew, and that way he can go through that with the executive committee and say, this is what's happening now, so that we can better understand when you talk about local impact to St. Bernard for the future project. Thank you.
Absolutely, and Bobby Landry might have something to add to this. As I mentioned, we had an economic impact study done, gosh, it had to be, Matt, 6-8 years ago? Pretty long time ago.
Yeah.
Tim Ryan.
No,
Yeah.
this was the.
John Martin.
It was right after Katrina.
Yeah, and so last year we went through the process of updating that impact, and we decided to go with LSU, Stephen Barnes. We wanted it done from an academic side because they tend to be more conservative with numbers, and so we're in the process of getting that finalized. I don't know, Michelle, month, 2 months?
I think probably within a month, but before then, that number came from the draft, so I can get you
Yeah,
an answer.
from the draft.
Okay.
And what's important about that is, one, we want them to finish that because, to your point, Deborah, it'll create the basis for looking at the bigger total for a project. And like I said, the nuance for this one will be not only, right now we have container terminals, so we can, use a formula, but really building the logistics center is some different numbers, some different drivers with assumptions about the types of businesses you get. So we've asked them to nail down the current study so that they can start on doing this project, but we'll send you whatever we have.
Yeah, just send it to
And just know it's still draft. I know LSU is still beating it through. Yeah. Okay, thanks. Any other questions, Rita?
I would first like to thank you, Brandy, for coming here today to provide an overview of what we hope will be a truly transformative project for St. Bernard Parish. I especially would like to thank each of you, our council members, for your vision, your dedication, and also your continued partnership with the Miro Foundation. As president of the Miro Foundation, it is my great honor to represent my fellow board members here today. As you know, our foundation is a private, nonprofit that leverages its land holdings to improve the quality of life of the residents of St. Bernard Parish. We have donated and entered into charitable leases of land to boost the local economy and add amenities to the parish, such as the hospital, the Arlene Miro Elementary School, the Sheriff's Substation, the Wetlands Observatory, the Delacroix Island Pier, and the bike trail, among others. We also place properties into commerce to meet these same goals, such as with the Walmart and the Tractor Supply. As many of you know, our board is highly strategic in how we approach land use, and we always seek to ensure that our actions advance our foundation's mission to improve St. Bernard Parish. We approached our SINCLAIR tract of property in the same manner. Months ago, in partnership with the St. Bernard Economic Development Foundation, we had the property certified by the Louisiana Department of Economic Development to allow the site to be marketed to potential developers. We know that appropriate development of the SINCLAIR tract can create jobs, generate tax revenue, and improve overall quality of life in St. Bernard. That is why we are excited about the potential that a state-of-the-art port center has for our community to create jobs, improve infrastructure, and bring about a brighter future for our parish. For this reason, as Ms. Brandy mentioned, the Miro Foundation and the port have entered into a period of due diligence to determine the feasibility of the project. This exploratory process will help ensure that the development of the SINCLAIR tract aligns with the Miro Foundation's mission and benefits the community of St. Bernard. And I'll close on a personal note. As you know, my husband and also one of my sons and his families live close to the property. So not only do we have a direct interest in this development, but we also care deeply about our neighbors and others who live by. Our foundation's agreement with the port will give us the information we need to make an informed decision, knowing what the net benefit this project will be to the people of St. Bernard. You know, we talk a lot about how to grow the economy and make this place where our children and grandchildren can prosper and raise their families. Well, this could be that project. That means a brighter future for us, them, and future generations. And I thank all of you. And I thank you again, Brandy. They've been wonderful to work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. Any other questions at this point? Any other thoughts, ideas? Was there anything that we missed that you feel needs to be looked at that wasn't up there on the feasibility studies? As we go through this, we will be reaching out with you, with the parish leadership, to get those ideas, get that feedback, and obviously with Miro in the Economic Development Corporation. So if you have no other questions or thoughts, I'll conclude with that. I really thank you for the opportunity, taking the time this morning. Again, I hope you that helped give you a bigger context of what's envisioned. And kind of where we're starting from is really with a vision, and I think a great location, a great parish that has infrastructure and deserves to have greater infrastructure. We're excited about that, and we'll be working closely with you, and as we start these studies, we'll be coming back and forth to keep you updated and hear your ideas and concerns. Thank you.